if you ask me about what will happen to the commercial architects, well, if they're so commercial, then they're in the business for money. They will find a way. If that is what they want, they will find another way. So we shouldn't care about it.
I try to describe it in two levels. One is about a shift in mindset. We need to think differently. And that goes for all of us. So that's one thing. And the other thing is we need to act differently. We need a different practice.
We should make use of material innovation a lot, actually. And we should combine it with transformation.
Hi and welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast, in which we will discuss extremely important and hard question, which is, should we stop building new buildings? And this is the question that comes from the initiative called Byggestoppbevægelsen, which could be translated from Danish into the construction stop or the construction freeze movement, which is this new Danish initiative uniting architects, engineers, builders, experts, but also citizens to push for a temporary national halt on new construction. Because the goal is to align the building sector with planetary boundaries and ensure affordable, quality housing for all. A new research report shows that even with more sustainable materials, at least 4 out of 5 new building projects in Denmark must be stopped to stay within the safe climate limits. What the Byggestoppbevægelsen, the Stop Building movement, proposes is to focus on renovation, repurposing and redistribution of existing buildings instead, but also introducing CO2 taxes on materials, restricting demolitions, and reforming property taxation and financial regulation. Their 3 main demands are less construction, more redistribution, less demolition, more renovation, and less speculation and more social justice. And today I'm joined by 2 very bright minds, architects, Nicolai Bo Andersen, who is an architect and professor at the Center for Sustainable Building Culture at the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen, and also Søren Nielsen, very experienced practicing architect for over 25 years at the Danish studio Vandkunsten, and currently the professor at the Aarhus School of Architecture. Let's dive into the question, should we build or should we stop building new buildings? Well, let me just start and say, Nicolai and Søren, welcome to Urbcast. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you here, and we should thank Danny Hansen as well for sharing this initiative, because with my podcast, I try to capture different things connected to architecture and urbanism in Denmark, but not only. But what I wanted to suggest is that we discuss one of the very important topics and very fresh topics. I feel like this is the topic that we have been talking in the industry for several years, but it is not very old topic. Before we start, to the listeners who might not be aware of your work, could you just very briefly introduce yourself?
I can start. I've been a practicing architect for 35 years, and I've mostly been occupied with housing projects, and in particularly affordable housing, and also sustainability strategies for housing. So that is it's a combination. I'm specialized in housing and ecology, I would say. So that is what I'm teaching now as a professor at the Aarhus School of Architecture, housing, settlements, ecological economy.
I'm Nicolai. I'm an architect and a professor at the Royal Danish Academy. And I've been interested in basically transformation, cultural heritage, restoration for many years, and have been also practicing, but these days mostly writing about strategies and theories on transformation and sustainable building culture.
So we have this mix of practice, but also academia, which I think it is very interesting because in this podcast so far, I've been talking with both sides. I've been talking to city architects as well. And I think that this is very interesting, what we do as practitioners, but also what we teach. And I think that this is also a great opportunity to inspire some younger listeners. What is the current state of the situation, so to say. So I would like to talk about the biggest bevægelsen, the movement to freeze or to stop building, construction, but also about the space justice, because this is also the topic you are very interested in, Nicolai. Let us maybe start with this need for sustainable development, but there's this one particular thing I wanted to ask you about, because there's been a lot of talk about the sustainable materials. So that now we can build with hay, we start building again with wood, and even start to build some tall buildings with wood, even here in Denmark. But is it actually the answer?
If I may start just to give a brief overview of the history of sustainability, because the question about sustainability is not at all new. The phrase or the term was coined in 1713 by a German, I don't know what it's called. He worked with wood and he used the term sustainable use, nachhaltige Nutzung, because already at that time they knew that if you use too much wood, then you ran out of that resource quickly. And then, of course, we know ecological economics started more than 50 years ago, when it was described that we only have this one planet, and we cannot have exponential economic growth on a limited planet. And so we have basically known that for many, many years. Later, the Brundtland Report defined sustainable development as sustainability that has something to do with current situation, but also future generations. Yeah, so that's just to say that the whole idea of sustainability, it's an old question actually, and we've actually been discussing that for many, many years. In my point of view, it's just becoming more and more clear now that we can actually see and we can feel the consequences because, we have more and more extreme weather. We can suddenly see the climate behaving in ways that we may not have seen before, but now it becomes physical and it becomes really visible that we have a serious problem.
Haven't we in a way overused the word sustainable in Danish, bæredygtig? Because nowadays you hear, or the last maybe 10 years, you would hear a lot about, sustainable development, sustainable goals. Even my master's studies in Sweden were called sustainable urban design. And I was trying to find what sustainable actually means, but I feel like it's hard to tell nowadays.
There's been a change of notions over time, and I've been working with this field since I went to high school. It's been an interest of mine, and I didn't know what to use it for back then. But later, as an architectural student, and later as a practicing architect, I've been fortunate to be able to put it into practice. And it started with the energy crisis back in the 70s, and it was a supply crisis, and now it's and later on, the notion of sustainability was reinvented by the Brundtland Report, and the basic definition was that we should act in a way so the future generations would be able to practice have the same degree of welfare as we have. So now it has. And then it has been greenwashed and misused, and now we are talking about regenerative architecture and regenerative principles, and there's a definition struggle going on, and sooner or later we will have to discard that notion too, because it has been misused. So to me, it's been a long journey from this energy saving focus in the 80s and the 90s, and then to this the discovery of how much embedded energy is related to the material resources, and then finding strategies for preserving the material resources in different ways, which also led me some 15 years ago to the conclusion that the main activity of the architect should become a transformation. So I went into renovation projects and tried to cultivate that as a business field in our company Vandkunsten, where I was a partner for many years. And now, about 5 years ago, I came to the next conclusion, the next leap. We can't build new anymore because the planetary boundaries are so trespassed, and to such a degree, and we have a responsibility in the global north. We have shrinking populations, and it's not our turn to build anything new, or very little at least. So we have a global ratio, and we have overused it for many years, and now we should leave it or reserve the rest of the ratios to the global south. Then we should find strategies for sufficiency in everything we do, including architecture.
I would like to try to define the term sustainability, because even though I totally agree it has been totally misused, but it actually means something very specific. So if you go to, I talked before about Hans Carl von Karlowitz in 1713, he defined sustainable use as a balance between input and output in a specific system. For instance, a forest. And the problem is that today we are out of balance. And we are out of balance in so many parameters. 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries have been transgressed. So we are out of balance. So today, balancing is not enough to get back into balance. We need regenerative approaches that can actually help us to get back into balance, back inside the safe operating space of the planetary boundaries. So for me, that's what sustainability is about. It's a goal in a way. It's something that we need to go towards, but it's not a stamp that you can say, okay, now we're home free, we're certified sustainable architect or something. That doesn't exist.
If we can return to your initial question about the materials and what that does mean for architecture and architecture and the strategies that we can apply. I think we should make use of material innovation a lot, actually, and we should combine it with transformation. Problem is that it's all about what Nicolai is talking about. It's about finding a new balance, and we can't find that balance within the system that we are part of today. And that was the next revelation I had. That I found that we are caught in a building industrial complex. We are not building not at least in the global north. We are not building to serve human needs. Basically, we are building to serve financial needs for return of investment. So this financialization of our architectural product, it has something which has been reinforced over the last decade. And as an architect, you get into an ethical dilemma. Can I stay within this system, or will I have to looking out for alternative ways of practicing my profession? And that's what I've been lucky to do that. Not everyone can do that, but everyone can ask the questions, and everyone can push a bit where they are.
Whom would you push then? Whom would you challenge? Is it the client? Is it the legislation? Because, I mean, if you manage to convince, let's say, one client, a developer, or a similar actor, it's only one case. Although there are also some more ambitious developers, even here in Denmark, who would, from the get-go, set some more ambitious targets, maybe even more ambitious than the legislation. But don't you think that until we don't change the legislation, nothing will actually happen, and we will only have those singular flagships projects and only some ambitious architects, but status quo will remain status quo?
Well, it's super complex. And for me, I try to describe it in 2 levels. One is about a shift in mindset. We need to think differently. And that goes for all of us. So that's one thing. And the other thing is we need to act differently. We need a different practice. But maybe we should just define the term building stop. What does it really mean when people hear it? You also suggested yourself that it's stop of architecture. No, I believe the contrary. It's we need more architecture and we need less boring buildings because we have enough of that. One way to define a moratorium in new building is we should stop building the non-essential new buildings in the Western world as long as we are outside of the planetary boundaries. So that's a definition, and to do that we need to demolish much less, and we need to build new much less, and we need to transform much more. In continuation of Søren's, you just mentioned sufficiency, the sufficiency approach. I would argue in that line of thinking, we need to use what we already have and use it also for new purposes as point number one. Point number two, we need to improve what we already have, which means retrofitting. It means improving both efficiently, but also aesthetically what we already have. Thirdly, we need to share the number of square meters we have. We have plenty of square meters in the Western world, in Europe, and in particular in Denmark.
That's true. This is the one I was looking up the statistics today, and Denmark is having one of the highest housing areas per capita in the world, not even in the European Union. And I think that this is a great idea to discuss the biggest Stopbewegelsen itself, so the stop building movement, because as you said, and just let's repeat them, this is like based on those three demands. So less construction, less new construction and more redistribution, less demolition but more renovation, but also less speculation and more social justice. And I was looking today because when we talk about building less and also having this big affordability crisis and housing crisis in Europe and not only, I always think about the empty buildings and empty units. Because, for example, in Warsaw, where I'm coming from, there is this housing challenge, but there is also a lot, like thousands and thousands of free empty units. And I found out that there's also something here in Copenhagen, that there is about 8 to 10,000, I mean, depends on the statistics, of empty units. But this is not given to the people as well because of the speculation, because of the big players, big pension funds investing in the more expensive apartments instead of putting them on the market for a lower price. How could especially architects target such a big challenge?
Many ways, but first I would like to say that there's a connection between what Nicolai said before and then this the existence of large amount of unused square meters in empty buildings. First of all, the reason why architecture is not going to die in a transformation regiment or dominated regiment, it's because it's much more difficult. It's much more interesting actually for an architect. The building physics are much more complicated. You will have to spend much more hours, architect hours, to make the design and find the solutions. And then you will have much more interesting details and architectural motives. And it's much more complex and interesting. And that is exactly why the investors are not walking into that business before there will be a prohibition of new construction, because it's more expensive to pay the architects. And not only the architects, they will have to calculate the risk, because you have not fully control of an existing building. They might hide all kinds of toxins, and there's a lot of surprises in older building. I don't know if they're waiting, if they are considering that will never be a business case, but we have seen some investors taking the initiative to invest in transformation, and that is very positive. And even though they're doing it purely for profit purposes, I would like to push them forward as good examples.
In continuation of that, it's also, I totally agree that transformation is much more interesting. So it's also a shift in how we understand our work as architects. Instead of making spectacular objects that become investment objects, that become a commodity that you can buy and sell, we should reinvent architecture as a practice that actually is about making good living conditions for people and other species for that matter.
Also, the social potential in renovation and the transformation is much bigger, and that's what I've been experiencing over the last 15 years when I've been working with renovation, where you have tenants who are going to move back into the renovated homes, and you have to collaborate with them. You have to have workshops evening after evening for literally for years before you find the solutions. But then they have ownership to those solutions, and they've had influence. I have learned something, and they have learned something too. There's also it's almost you could say a process of general education in a transformation-dominated regiment. We would be able to cultivate a completely new building culture, where with a much stronger relationship between the inhabitants and the physical buildings.
When I hear about architects speaking and advocating against building new buildings, I wonder, isn't it self-sabotage? Because in a way, you are cutting off the branch you are sitting on. You say you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. So do you foresee a world in which architecture is primarily about the transformation? And what about those more commercial architects? Because now you're also sitting more on the academia side. What about those who, live off designing new buildings and commercial architecture?
I would argue that it's the opposite. It's the other way around, that if we continue the way we do today, we cut off the branch that we're sitting on, because there is, as Søren has said many times, there is only one planet. So we cannot just continue, and it's because of the resources, it's because of the energy, it's because of the land use. It's simply biophysically impossible to continue the way we do. So if we look in the long term, or just not really that long term, but in a near future, it is biophysically impossible to continue the way we do. In that situation, looking forward, we really need to redefine the role of the architect. And again, instead of thinking of ourselves as people who build objects, we should think of ourselves as people who makes dwellings meaningful places for people to live on this planet.
If you ask me about what will happen to the commercial architects, well, if they're so commercial, then they're in the business for money. They will find a way. If that is what they want, they will find another way. So we shouldn't care about it. Those who are currently occupied with building developments, which is not architecture but investment products, and with generic universal architecture or geometries and materials, that field will be taken over by AI, because it's too easy. You already have a software which can simulate it. It's only a matter of responsibility since they're still using human architects. So AI would not be able to do the renovation projects. That is at least my hope, because everything is specific. They have to start all over. Who knows? But I would be really worried about my future if I was a commercial architect, if I was one of those on the stock exchange working only for the profit.
I would add to that scene from the perspective of the craft people who actually do the renovation job. I imagine would think it would be much more interesting to work with transformation than just, instead of putting up a lot of gypsum boards and putting on plastic paint and doing it as fast as possible, then renovation and transformation work is much more interesting for the craftspeople, and they will never run out of jobs. There's so much to do that in Europe alone, there's like 75% of the whole European building stock that needs to be renovated before 2050. So there's a lot of work to be done by craftspeople, but also by architects.
That's a really good point. Also because we will, as architects, we will have to find the solutions on the side in collaboration with the craftsmen, and so we will have to spend much more time at the building site, just like you did generations ago, and I think it would be a much more interesting, meaningful way of working, both as a craftsman and as an architect, actually. And I don't think those fields can be taken over by AI.
So there is no other way. I feel like this movement and thinking behind limiting the building, the new construction, is getting more radical, because there is some great work done by different architects like Effect and Zebra and other partners as well. There's been a project about the donut for the urban development. So basically talking about the planetary boundaries and how do we fit the development into that. There also been the 2 versions actually of the reduction roadmap, advocating for reduction of the building. And now we are talking about the biggest stop. So now we are talking about stopping the whole building, right, movement. And this movement pushes for a temporary national halt on the new construction to basically realign with how we design. Is that even possible? How do you see that happening? And what do you think about this evolution of also language we use around building? Thinking of those different projects like Reduction Roadmap and now biggest Bevægelsen.
For me, it's not really a big problem, not at all. I've been teaching and researching in this field for 15 years, actually also practicing before that, like 25 years ago, I've been working with restoration transformation projects. So I'm not at all surprised, but I want to point out that in continuation, what we have been talking about, it's difficult. Everybody should not just think that they're really good at doing transformations, because it demands a specific attentiveness to that specific situation. It's not a generic concept that you just invent and then you can place it everywhere, like some architects have been used to for the past 25 years. No, it's rather a situation where you have to be, I think, a little bit more modest and much more open to the specific situation, both regarding the building itself, the spatial qualities, the tectonic qualities, material qualities, but also the users, the craftspeople, as we've talked about. Again, I've been teaching transformation for 15 years, and we have a lot of excellent students that has worked in this field for many years. So I think we should we have a lot of methods and approaches, but also theoretical frameworks that could help us to do that in a way that again, I'm just repeating what we already said, that will make the work of architects much more interesting.
Yeah, first of all, you could say that there's a communicative move to call it a building stop. There's no one is claiming that we should stop building kindergartens where it's needed, or now soldier barracks, which is also a topic. But it's in order to call the attention mainly to politicians and other people in power, because they are, of course, against it. And the Danish industry, the lobby organization, or the organization of Danish companies, they have already started a lobbying campaign against our building stop movement. So that is a sign that it takes it seriously, which is good, of course. But now there's a war going on, actually, for a period of time. So what could be the result of this? Perhaps a tightening of the legislation to demolition, for instance. Also perhaps evolution or development of political tools for housing policy, because right now there's only one in the toolbox, and that is increasing the supply of homes. There's so many other things you can do, and which you have been able to do in the history, and it's kind of forgotten, because there's this very strong promotion of the need to build more, because there's so extremely strong economic interests in that. It's the municipalities, they are selling land in order to finance infrastructural projects, and the of course the pension funds, they need to anchor their investment capital in something real estate as part of the portfolio, particularly when the markets for equities and bonds are very volatile. So we are up against really strong forces. Another result could be that we could actually push more of that investment capital into transformation projects and perhaps create incentives, develop political incentives to attract investments in transformation. It could be the tax reductions, it could be bonuses, it could be other measures actually.
Only logical answer to the situation that we're in, that we have exceeded the 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, is that we need to do things radically different. So that's kind of, we know that. There's really no discussion about that. So what is happening is that at first you become ridiculed. Then there's a second step where you become criticized, and that's what's happening right now, threatened even. And then the third step is that suddenly everybody says, "Oh, we've said that all the time. Of course, we're doing transformation." And so when we meet in a few years from now, we'll be at step 3, and everybody will just accept that. Of course, that's what we do.
That reminds me of today's lecture by Simon Kjær Hansen, who was actually a guest in this podcast as well. He mentioned that basically there were some big changes in the society that were unthinkable of until it became the only solution, and then people followed. I wanted to follow on that, coming slowly to the end, and I wanted to ask you about this perception of the movement. So you basically say that there is already some resistance, and you have already some negative voices by the Danish industry and so on. But what do you need basically to move forward? So how much support do you need for this initiative to move forward in your opinion? And do you think that you can build this movement in Denmark, which is still, compared to other countries in Europe, quite a small country?
It's also a big question, because what is really needed is a systems change. The one problem is that we don't, for the so-called externalities, so we don't really pay what the resources are actually worth, and we don't really pay for our pollution. So if we did that, if we actually paid what it costs the ecosystem to extract the resources and to use the energy and to burn oil and coal, if that was really priced according to the damage it makes, then it would be really, really expensive. At the other end of the line, the pollution that you make, when you just tear down an old building and throw it out, if that was priced, if you really put a price tag on that, then again it would be really, really expensive. Just by doing that, the whole situation would be completely different. And that's, again, just a very cool analytical analysis of what could be done so that we could get back in balance, back inside the planetary boundaries.
Is that your call to action? Because at the end, I wanted you to kind of address the listeners, because as I said, there is a big base of listeners in many countries, in Poland, in Germany, in the UK as well. So if you had some kind of closing word, some call to action, what would it be? So that we also inspire architects and listeners overall, not only in Denmark, but also in other countries.
Architects today, practicing architects in particular, walking on a very thin line and keeping the balance between the ideal positions and the practical day-to-day life, everyday life. As a former partner and leader of a large office, I would say that if you have to navigate strategically, you will have to know what the final destination is, and that is where I'm completely agree with what Nicolai just said. I'm just worried about the steps toward the goals and how to direct the individual projects. And as a rule of thumb, I think you should walk away from bread and butter projects. If there's no improvements, if there's nothing that is directing the company or yourself in towards the final target, then walk away from it, find something else to do. Actually, most often you can actually do something. You can also influence within your office, in professional environment that you are part of, in your team, in your collaboration team with engineers, etc. You can raise the agendas and that help us getting closer to the social tipping point that we will have to get to.
I think we're living in really exciting times, actually. And for some reason, I keep being positive because I think we are right now at a really interesting moment where we need to ask ourselves, what do we think is important? What road do we need to take? And ask ourselves maybe also some deeper philosophical questions. What does it mean to have a good life? How can we arrange ourselves on this planet within the planetary boundaries? And how can we do so we allow everybody on the planet to have a good life? And basically, I think that should be the task of the architect, to think like that and to propose habitation on this planet that is meaningful.
Last quick question about a book recommendation. If you could share something with the listeners that could inspire them further.
If someone wanted to define goal and also to be guided by some kind of relatively easy philosophy, I think they should read Timothée Parik's book, Degrow or Die. It's in English.
Very radical, but thank you. I will add it to the description. And for you?
I had a few that I was not really sure what I should mention. And I think one that Søren and I agree on is Pierre Charbonnier's Affluence and Freedom, which is really interesting. It's about environmental history of political ideas. Yeah, I can really recommend that.
Thank you for that, for the recommendation. I will add it for the listeners to find and hopefully read. Again, Søren Nicolai, thank you very much for joining me here in Urbcast to discuss why we should limit or ideally stop the new build as our planet requires that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this new discussion with Søren and Nicolai. If that was inspiring, please share it with someone that also might find it interesting. Also, I'm adding the book recommendation in the description of the episode, as well as the link to the Birgitte Bevegelsen's website. So if you feel like you would like to contribute, comment, or talk to my guests, please reach out and let's continue the discussion. Talk to you soon.